Peter Joseph, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing great. It's been a nice morning. Pretty streamlined on the focus, minus one or two things, but that's expected.
I'm glad to hear. I am really, really glad to hear. Excited to have you on the show today. Excited to go through the topic that we're going to discuss. But before we do dive into that, can you give the listeners a bit of context about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I'm a health coach and I have ADHD and I focus a lot on ADHD and just mental health in general because I have ADHD and anxiety, so I've developed a lot of systems and practices around that. I actually didn't get diagnosed with either of these until recently. I had an unofficial diagnosis a year and a half ago, or 2 years ago now, and then recently it just got through the diagnostic full criteria, and it was confirmed. But you when you deep dive and you're more self-aware and you're just like, okay, how can I go around this? You start to develop the systems without even knowing because you already recognize the symptoms. So it's just like, oh, okay. And so I personal train in person and then I focus on this stuff online just because I've noticed it helps a lot of people.
Yeah, absolutely. And prior to that diagnosis, how long have you been living with both ADHD and anxiety?
I would say I started noticing symptoms around middle school. But I was a kid that walked on my tippy toes anyway when I was walking, and I guess that's a sign of neurodivergent tendencies anyway, just due to the nervous system and all that good stuff. So if you track that, that's probably towards elementary school or even pre, because it is a neurodevelopmental disorder, because the brain is just changed, right? So things are firing a little bit differently. There's more, I want to say creative style thinking. It's called neurodivergent because you're not thinking in linear lines. And so I think that thought process was really through middle school that I really noticed that. So I was one of those kids that was pretty smart to where I got promoted to gifted classes. But there's this one class to where you had to read two textbook chapters a night, basically. And I would throw these temper tantrums just because of how bored I was, and it was just too much. So I've overstimulated. And ADHD is a lack of emotional regulation. So you have emotional dysregulation as well, and a hard time focusing on things that bore you. Because the thing with dopamine and norepinephrine, they help you focus, they help you get tasks done with your executive function and all that stuff. That is impaired when you have ADHD. Now, I have a mild form, so it doesn't affect me that much because it's on a spectrum, because everybody's brains are different. Trauma can change it, comorbidities, because a lot of people will have additional diagnoses like dyslexia and anxiety, depression, things like that. Some even have bipolar or other stuff. So it's just such a complex thing. But with me, I noticed middle school was when I was starting to get dysregulated.
Yeah, and this might be a good opportunity to give people a definition of ADHD. You just mentioned emotional dysregulation ultimately, and also kind of a lack of this executive functioning in the brain and a lack of being able to focus for long periods of time. Can you give us a little bit more of like a concrete definition of what exactly that looks like and maybe explain the spectrum side of things as well?
ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And you might have heard of it as ADD. Well, now it's all under this umbrella term of ADHD. But there are some professionals in the community that are saying it's actually not a deficit disorder in attention. It's a variable attention. So you're able to focus, but just variably. You can't control it. Because one of the cool things, I call it a superpower, but unfortunately, it's like Russian roulette to where you never know when it's actually going to fire with hyperfocus to where you can spend most amounts of time on something for hours getting maybe 3 hours worth of work done that would take somebody a month. I've done that before, but you can't control it, unfortunately. So it's varied attention. And then there is the emotional dysregulation. There's different styles too. So if you're going by the ADHD definition, there's hyperactivity, inattentive, and then combined type. Just because it says inattentive doesn't mean you're inattentive. It just means maybe your thoughts wander a little bit more, maybe you lose focus a little bit more, or you're distracted easily, something like that. Hyperactivity, you'll see more signs of to where there's more fidgeting or even more anger or things of that nature. So the combined type is both of those, and then you have the separate ones. The combined type's the most common. If you have hyperactive specific, that is the least common. But that goes through the different diagnoses that you could get through the psychiatrist, psychologist, to where they have more interventions for it.
Got you. No, that does make a lot of sense, and it's good to know all the definitions and the variant and the spectrum, like you mentioned as well. Obviously, there's different aspects that people can have. So is there a certain moment where maybe this is kind of controlling someone's life a little bit more, and then there's other people on the other hand where it's just something that they know they have to navigate and live with on a day-to-day basis, but it's not something that really impacts their day-to-day as much as potentially someone on the right-hand side of the spectrum?
Yeah, so the cool thing with it is everybody experiences life differently whether you have this or not, right? All this does is it changes the way you go about things and how you can go about them, to where you have to adjust systems to be able to fit your needs, to where you'll see a lot of entrepreneurs with ADHD. Now, it is a spectrum to where some people, it is very disabling, and that's where medication can come into play and other lifestyle changes. Other people need very minimal help with it, and they just have to learn how to organize a bit more, and that's it, right? So it depends. I've noticed that the symptoms on my end are mild because of all the lifestyle changes I did throughout my life. I was a very active kid, so exercise, nutrition, all that stuff was very pillarsome in there, and then I knew I had to be regimented on sleep just because I would wake up at 4:30 a.m. in the morning so I can make sure I made my food for wrestling, because I wrestled quite a bit, and that's helpful. When it comes to ADHD, it can dictate the way somebody does things, but it's mainly a perception of how you view the world and how you go about things that it does, and learning how you are experiencing it is the main key takeaway there.
And where has it been disadvantageous in your life so far because of, like you said, like the hyper focus on a certain activity for 3 hours that gets a month's worth of work done sounds like a pretty positive thing. But I know that obviously there's many aspects of it when it comes down to the lack of being able to control it and everything along those lines that might make it difficult. So where is it disadvantageous for someone like yourself, for example, who it isn't at the kind of debilitating level, the medication need level? From my understanding, at least, you can tell me a little bit more about your story, but what are some of the challenges that you face as you're transitioning through that? I guess the lack of knowing whether it's actually a condition or not until you get diagnosed is probably a big one as well.
Yeah, so you start to notice tendencies that you have anyway, so I didn't even associate with it. My partner actually was just like, I think you got this. And then I looked more into it. I was like, oh, I might actually have this. So the stuff I notice is I call them transition times, to where I end up doom scrolling in the car before I even go in, right? To where I'm scrolling for like an hour, not even realizing it. So I have a lot of dead time that ends up happening in my transitions, to where I'm not able to get as much done because I'm not able to transition faster. Also, I am somebody that is very ethical, to where if somebody's going against those ethics and things like that, I have like this self-righteous type thing, to where I'm just like, no, that's not right, and it pisses me off a little bit, and that could end up getting me in some negative situations in itself, to where it shouldn't be that big of a deal. It's really not that big of a deal, but to me it is, and until after you experience that, it's just like, oh man, if only I didn't act that way. And I'm really good at not acting in that kind of manner as much, but it took a lot of work, right, to where you have to be able to emotionally regulate, accept it, kind of walk away from the situation, get out of the corner, stuff like that. With me, sometimes, if I'm just bored doing a task, I will go and find an excuse not to do it, and that leads to a lack of needed things to get done that aren't getting done as much in a timely manner. But if I really like the task, you're right, I can be super productive. But unfortunately, with everything, there's pros and cons of doing it, and that goes into jobs too. I'm a personal trainer in person, because I can't sit still all day, Like, I have to be consistently doing something. But organization was the thing that I had to work on quite a bit, and thankfully I was able to do it before it got to the point to where it was debilitating on that front. But I live by my calendar. I see a lot of fellow ADHDers that are constantly late and doing things just because they haven't been able to factor in the time of transitions. They haven't been able to factor in the time of how long it actually takes to get ready, because there's a time blindness to it. And okay, if it's 15-minute drive away, let me plan for 30 to 45 minutes that I have to leave because I know I'm going to get distracted. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like those type of things. I have to really plan ahead in order to get on it, and that's part of what gets the anxiety going too, because I just don't like disappointing people either, and myself. I have very high expectations. So those are some of the downsides, I would say.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And tie in that anxiety piece for me as well. Is it one is a precursor to another? Is it the fact that, like you said, you might spend an hour doom scrolling and end up missing something that's important, and maybe you don't have that guarantee that you're not going to doom scroll, and that leaves you a little bit concerned of like, okay, I've got a client waiting for me in the gym and I don't actually know if I'm going to be able to make it or not because I don't know about this transition time. And I guess that a lot of self-awareness and learning about yourself, and like you said, living by the calendar is probably incredibly important. But does that kind of feed into it, or was the anxiety a separate piece, or do they come kind of hand in hand? Is this a normal thing you see with those who have ADHD?
Yeah, so I would say for me it's hand in hand. Some people with ADHD, the anxiety is from an untreated ADHD. It really depends on that person and how they experience it, right? Anxiety ends up amplifying the symptoms of ADHD because it is an emotional dysregulation, to where now you're stressed out. Now it's making the other things worse. You're starting to forget other things, and now you're stressed out even more because you forgot the other things. And it's just like this dual function of just self-deprecating system, right? And self-defeating system. And for me personally, I go down rabbit holes. I'm constantly thinking in the future. I would say that's where it gets me. Whether that's part of the ADHD or not is another story, because I do have bingo ball thoughts, you know, where they're just kind of, oh, wait, let's explore that rabbit hole. Let's explore that one. Sometimes there's just so many thoughts that can be anxiety, and you have to be able to filter them. Be like, okay, is this helpful to what I'm going? Sometimes you just have to explore a rabbit hole, and that can be annoying too. So some of that does it, some of it doesn't. So I think it depends on the person, you know?
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to go through some strategies of how you navigate that in just a moment, but I want to stay on understanding this a little bit more. And again, those things that you mentioned, they are, to a degree, somewhat part of the human condition as well. Like, I've been subject to doom scrolling. I'm sure everyone has. I've been subject to maybe getting too many thoughts in my head and not being able to focus on the thing that I need to do until I've actually done that. I don't think I particularly identify with ever having ADHD, and I probably wouldn't look into it because I don't feel that I crazy identify with it. But I can imagine there's a lot of people who are thinking, wow, that sounds a lot like me. So like you said, there's a spectrum, of course, but how do you get to a place where you're like, well, how much is enough to make me think that maybe I need to look into this and determine whether this is actually something that is going on in my life, or am I just putting a label on myself that might not actually exist, and these are just maybe my lack of organization, or me doing things that I'm not that interested in, for example? Because I'm sure there's a lot of gray areas in sense of saying, okay, is this really the challenge that I'm facing here, or is it just a bunch of other things that are existing and are just part of the human condition?
Yeah, so you're right. A lot of it is part of the human condition, but this is how I would say it. Pretend you have a turbo booster on your car, right? So everything is amplified when you have an ADHD brain. It's like this supercharged computer, and it needs more rest afterwards too. So you end up having to have more energy involved in getting a task done and starting it, rather than actually doing it. Because once you build the momentum, it can be great. Doom scrolling, yeah, that can be normal for anybody. The doom scrolling that happens with me is as a transition time, to where it ends up making the transition time. So it's those transitions. What I would say is, if you think you may have it, it's whether it's debilitating or not. I didn't really get it explored because I didn't think it was debilitating too much. But then I was being told how my habits were affecting others, and I was like, oh, okay, that's not good. So let's see if we can decrease those a little bit, so I can have more quality time with my significant other, and be able to have other things organized, because I don't want to explode at work, you know what I mean? And I usually don't. But, some people with ADHD do, to where they just couldn't help it. And it depends on the person, like on what they're experiencing. I have the more inattentive style, to where I'm just a little bit more easily distractible. So all of a sudden we're in a conversation, right? And I'm talking to somebody, and then all of a sudden I'm thinking of something they said, but I went down a rabbit hole of what they said. To where I'm just like, oh, Avocados? Well, avocados are very high in fat. That's good. Well, that fat should be able to help with brain development. Okay, well, where can you find the avocados? How much water does it take those avocados? Things like that. Like, it's just like, oh, okay, that was a nice rabbit hole. Oh, shit, I'm talking to somebody. Let me, let me get back to that conversation. I'm really good at making it look like I'm paying attention, but sometimes I just am not, right? So where I sometimes can't understand people unless I'm looking at their lips. Like, it's kind of like subtitles on a TV, right? To where it makes me look like I'm paying attention too, because I am. That helps me kind of stay on track. But if I just stare at somebody's eyes, I'm just focused on staring at their eyes to maintain eye contact instead of understanding what they say. But I find looking at the mouth connects the dots for me because it still kind of looks like I'm looking at their eyes, but not. But when it comes to ADHD, it's really about, is it affecting you and the people around you to a debilitating degree? Is it causing you to decrease the actual efficiency in how you can go about your job, how you go about school, how you do other things? How big of a deal with it is it? For me, it's mild because it doesn't affect all those things, but it's enough to cause concern. I don't think so, personally, because I am in a job that it's not as exacerbated. But I'll tell you this, I had a little bit of a desk job portion before, and it was miserable because I just can't sit that long, and I can't focus on paperwork that long. It has to be varying degrees in order to get me to kind of spiral around back to it. Like, I maybe spend an hour or two on admin stuff just to get it done a day, but I can't really spend that much more.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And why do so many people go undiagnosed? Obviously, I'm not sure how old you are, but I imagine you're in your 20s, 30s, something along those lines, and it took you some time to get that diagnosis eventually. Why is it that so many people are not being diagnosed soon enough? Like you said, it's not reached a stage in their life where it's become debilitating, but why should we have to wait until something gets debilitating before we provide help to the people that could be really supported by the fact that they have that acknowledgement? Because I imagine a big part of this, and this tends to be the case with any conditions that anyone has, is the clarity is just a big thing. It's just that sense of like, okay, at least I know what's going on now, so I have something to hold on to and to navigate my challenges. But when you're in the dark and you're just thinking, this is just the way I am, I think or there feels like there's something that's not quite 100%. I don't want to call it right, but you know what I mean. There's just a feeling that something's a little bit off, but I can't work out quite what that is. I think that's maybe a worse place to be than once you've got your diagnosis and you're like, oh, well, okay, well, now I know that. Now I need to understand the condition a little bit more. And here are some strategies that obviously people have worked out. And there's medication as well if this is really bad, etc. So why are so many people undiagnosed? And is there any solutions that you see based on the research that you've done to solving that challenge?
Yeah, so I think there's two paths that end up happening. There's people that are self-aware with ADHD that are just like, oh, okay, let me just see what works for me. And they go that way, and they end up developing systems that work for them. Those are the people that are more self-aware, all that good stuff. But unfortunately, not a lot of people with ADHD are. And that's where you go down the other route to where it's just like, man, I just don't fit in. Things aren't going that well. Then they end up going down this spiral to where now they feel like shit, they have depression, they have anxiety, because they're just not able to do anything right. Part of that is because the society does not support the systems in place that are needed for ADHD, because it's a neurotypical world. Most people aren't that way, and that's fine. But for the people that are, other things need to happen, right? When it comes to finding out if you have ADHD or not, well, if you're not aware of the symptoms or that you're displaying them, or that you need help, because people with ADHD, it's really hard for them to ask for help because they have this mentality of, I'm going to do it myself, I'm going to make this happen, I just need to try harder. And that's not the case. We don't need to try harder, we need to try smarter. We need to be more efficient. Because it's not a matter of us being dumb, it's just a matter of going about things a different way because of the way our cognition is, the way we think about problems, because we have certain deficits, but we have certain additives too. A lot of people aren't self-aware and or they don't know all the symptoms of ADHD. I'm sure most of us just think, oh, that kid's just overly hyper, that kid's got ADHD. Well, that's a very simplistic way of doing it, and that's why a lot of females were not diagnosed, because it's usually the rowdy males that are the ones causing disruptions in class, things like that. But the females, they usually have the inattentive style. And I think that's why it took so long for me to get diagnosed. Because I was good enough in school, it didn't affect my grades. Didn't bring up a warrant, right? Nobody cares as long as you get your homework done. I was smart enough to be able to catch on to something, after a few words and then fill in the blanks. But not everybody has that. And I'm not saying that that's being smart. I'm just saying it's connecting the dots in different ways. So people with an attentive style usually are the females, but there's a lot of males with it too, to where they end up going under the radar, to where it's just like, oh, they're not causing a disruption. That's fine. They just have bad grades. They just need to try harder. Well, that's not the case. That's just a different thing. And you'll see it in autism too. Like, due to the different ways it is on the spectrum, it's presented differently in males and females too. So you'll often see that the females aren't getting diagnosed as much unless they're actually displaying the things that are very, very, very apparent. And unless you're displaying the apparent things, it's not going to get caught. And that's the unfortunate thing. But there's a lot of stuff that happens that nobody sees. So it's just about asking questions, and unfortunately we don't ask enough of them.
Yeah, and unfortunately the benefit of being able to cover your tracks and be smart enough to work out those challenges and find your ways around them leads you to a disadvantage of not being, quote unquote, disruptive enough or failing enough for people to actually realize that there might be something going on beneath the surface. So something you've done to make your life, quote unquote, easier or more productive or more effective is actually ended up not leading you to get that help, which kind of sucks, to be completely honest. Like, you should be rewarded for that versus the opposite. How many people are affected by this percentage-wise? Are you aware of that?
I forgot the actual statistics, but I do know that if a parent has ADHD, there's a 1 in 3 chance a child's going to have it, right? So, the numbers are constantly increasing. That's why I haven't bothered to memorize the statistic at the moment on how many people have ADHD. But there's a vast majority that are undiagnosed too, that just going under the radar. So I couldn't tell you actually how many people have it. I can just tell you it's raising. Whether it is due to now the brain is adapting to rapid stimulus or not, because of how much we have ahead of us, and now we're training the brain to try to adapt to decrease the amount of stimuli going in because there's so much, is a different story. Neurodevelopmentally wise, on that portion of it, people born with it because it is genetic, that is increasing just because I think a lot of people find a counterpart that ends up being organized, if they do have it, to make up for the deficits involved. Right? So it's like the yin and yang. You create balance in your relationship. There are ADHDers that end up with other ADHDers, but they display different types of the spectrum to where it kind of goes together, right? There's the person that's really clean, and there's the other person that's really not. So, and then I think usually you hear this thing to where, oh yeah, I found my neurodivergent puzzle piece, to where a lot of ADHDers end up with autistic people, just because they end up being total opposites, but it goes together because they understand some of what they're going through. Or you just have somebody who is really organized or understanding, and they kind of help you develop systems around it. I was lucky enough to have a partner that is more organized and took time to observe how I went about things, because I went about them in a weird way. So, got it done, but I went around it in a weird way. So, she's like, you should get this checked out. But it wasn't enough to actually affect a lot of stuff. It was just something we can improve upon at that point.
Got you. That makes a lot of sense. And transitioning onto the health and fitness piece, I don't know too many people who are a personal trainer who also have ADHD. I can imagine that's quite a good niche that you found yourself there as well. It's nice that you've kind of turned around something that could have been seen as a quote unquote disadvantage as something in your favor, right? You are able to relate to people, you're able to help people, and especially if they are finding it challenging to kind of get about their day-to-day tasks, or maybe the work life that they have, then health and fitness might be one of those things that, for many people in life, irrespective if you've got ADHD or not, a lot of people deprioritize their health and fitness for other things that they're focusing on in life. And if those things that you're focusing on in life are even harder to do based on the condition that you have, then I can imagine that becomes even less of a priority. So how did you begin prioritizing that in your life? You mentioned wrestling earlier, so there was a bit of a sporting background, I can imagine. But how has that transitioned into the world of fitness and personal training?
So anytime you are going about life, it's good to lean into your strengths. And if you're really interested in something, that's a strength to lean into, right? And even more so with people with ADHD. I have done sports throughout my life, helped get my energy out. I think it helped manage the symptoms a lot, and the more research I do, the more it kind of accepts that. I feel like shit when I'm not doing something. So in order to make me feel better, I do fitness stuff. Now, how I go about that is different because I am in the gym all the time. I don't want to be in the gym on my personal time. So I have to find hobbies in order to get it going. So I used to wrestle. That got me really into it and into the field because I was cutting a lot of weight, as wrestlers do. I was like losing 12 pounds in a week, sometimes. Not healthy, don't recommend it, but I wanted to learn how to help others, do that healthily afterwards. Because I'm just like, I'm already creating training plans and everything for cross-country, wrestling, and stuff like that. And I used to get in arguments with my dad, and I would just go out for a run afterwards. And I guess that ended up being a great coping mechanism because it was something I should have done anyway. So, when I was younger. And I ended up keeping up the habit because I'm just like, well, I feel worse when I'm not doing this, so let me do it that way. So connecting with your why is very helpful. Like, okay, this makes me feel better. This is something that is just going to help my symptoms get better. I ended up prioritizing it when I was in my undergraduate degree. I was just trying to find a way to stick with it, really. I was trying to maintain the system of getting up at 4:30 a.m. That didn't last long. I was miserable doing that. That was just because I had incentive before and the way the structure of school system was and everything. But now that I can make my own schedule up, it was just like, okay, well, let's get some workouts in the afternoon or after school or before school when I can. And I like to make a goal of getting it 3 times a week because I see the best results with it. And then just have a nice little walk on the other days. I do rock climbing right now, and I cycle through hobbies. But rock climbing's been the one that's lasted the longest so far. And it's because they change the walls every time. And it's great. Every month, you have different things to play on, right? So it's like getting these little dopamine boosts on the level boosts you're doing, and you have a little bit of a goal that doesn't take too long to get to, and stuff of that nature, and you can always play around with it. For those that are busier and don't have as much time to get their fitness goals in, what I would say is find a hobby that is convenient enough for you to do at least once a week. And then maybe have supporting habits for that hobby to where you end up, maybe your hobby is a run club on the weekends. You're a weekend warrior and you want to get running. Do you have to run? No, don't worry about the running part. But this is just an example. So in the middle of the week, maybe you go on a 10-minute walk on a work break just to maintain some of the cardiovascular function. And whether you have ADHD or not, it's integrating it into your life when it comes to fitness than not. There's this... Basically, have a weekly goal. Okay, I want to be able to get 2 to 3 times in this week, or 3 times this week of movement. It doesn't have to be the specific thing you're training for, as long as you're getting movement in. Mine, I try to get 3 times a week of rock climbing. As long as I'm doing something, I'm good. My backup, I like to have 2 backups. So one backup is running, another backup is going on the elliptical. So now I have 3 things I can rotate through if I don't have enough time to get my movement in. So it's just like, oh, I'm in a time crunch, let me hop on 20 minutes on this thing, or 5 minutes on here. I still hit my goal for the week, right? So it's kind of making it attainable enough to where it's not all in, because there's this tendency of going all in, and you don't have to. It's something is better than nothing. Because if you're doing nothing, you're not doing anything, right? But if you're doing something, that's one step closer than what you would have been doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can build on the something, right? It's very hard to build on the nothing. But when you're in a place where you're at least getting, that walk in every single week, or you're getting that one session of whatever that might be. And like you said, you might be getting out to that run club. You can build on that. And it's also amazing how not necessarily easy. I don't want to use that word, but I am going to use it for lack of a better word in this moment. How easy it is to maintain things versus how difficult it is to actually like progress towards a certain place. So if you've got your health and fitness into a relatively decent place, you'd be amazed at how easy it can be to maintain by just doing one or two things to keep your body moving. And like you said, having a couple of supporting habits. And speaking of supporting habits, let's tie in nutrition into the mix here. How can people with that condition navigate their nutrition as well, especially when it comes to things like, well, the big thing with nutrition as well is a lot of preparation and a lot of organization. So I imagine there's a little bit of a difficulty there potentially with other priorities conflicting for that time and everything along those lines.
Yeah, so if we're getting ADHD specific on nutrition and exercise, really it's organizing the schedule first around these things so you can be able to do it. Because if you're stressed about something else, it's really easy not to do the other thing. Connecting to how it makes you feel is the first and foremost thing to help you stay into it. When it comes to exercise, aerobic training is going to help you focus more, and you can use that to set everything up. Resistance training is helpful for the different metabolic processes that help funnel everything, make you feel better so you can get the other things done. Nutrition, on the other hand, it's hard because a lot of people with ADHD, not all of them, I have this, it's out of sight, out of mind. So if I don't see it, I don't remember to grab it. So making things apparent and easier. So for example, if you had clear drawers, are you more likely to see the stuff in the drawers? So if you're able to have labels, if you're able to have different things, it's just like, okay, this is what I'm going to have. The way you go about the nutrition thing is the easier the better. So you don't have to make the meals. But if you can have something there for you that's a grab and go type of deal, maybe you have a bagged salad, maybe you have pre-cooked grilled chicken that you got in bulk, and you mix them together and you have the instant cook rice. Boom. The one that you put in the microwave and you just mix it all together. You have a meal. And making it as easy as possible is the way to get it done. Personally, because I'm passionate about it, I meal prep on Sundays and Tuesdays. So I have my system to where I have my breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They are made. Weekend, I don't prep it. I just kind of go about with it. But I have structured meal prep time, like meal eating times. I'm just like, oh, it's that time. Gotta go eat. Because it's harder to have that mind-body awareness of your hunger cues when you have ADHD, to where you're not as connected with the body. So what ends up happening is a lot of people with ADHD, they go all day without eating, and then by the time they get home, it's like this ravenous set. So now you have the binge eating that ends up happening and other things, and it's just like, oh no, I can't keep doing this, and then you feel bad about it, and then you eat even more because it makes you feel good. It's a comfort thing, right? And then the thoughts are going on. Well, in order to stop the thoughts, I just need to keep doing the motion of putting something in my face. And that's where like a lot of, I've been seeing some studies around obesity and ADHD, to where people who have ADHD are more likely to have obesity. It's just like, oh, okay. And then you'll also see some other studies to where people who have ADHD are more likely to have other eating disorders too. And part of it is because of executive function, the lack of impulse control. Because it's just like once you start, it's very hard to stop. And that ends up leading to all these other things. So it makes sense that there's more links to obesity, right? When it comes to the food, though, if you're able to structure things out, that helps a lot. If you're able to make swaps, having your environment set up for success. So if you know you're going to eat the whole bag of chips, maybe don't have the bag of chips in your home. You know what I mean? Buy the other things that you can snack on and go from there. If you need the motion, get a microwave bowl, put kernels in it, microwave it, put salt on it if you like savory, maybe salt and garlic powder. Put, if you like sweet, non-caloric sweetener with some cinnamon, and you can have your two different versions of savory or, sweet, and you have the motion of getting it in with minimal calories, and it's pretty high fibrous. Protein's very helpful for ADHD brains, to where it can help with concentration, focus, all that good stuff. When I started incorporating more protein in my diet, it's made the biggest deal. Now, most people aren't getting enough fiber anyway, so having more fiber is always helpful. I believe it's, don't quote me on this, I think it's around 34, 36 grams for men.
Makes sense.
And then for females, it's like 24 or 26. Something around there. It may not be the exact numbers, but it's around that ballpark. So most people aren't getting enough. Now, I would get blood work done and see what minerals or not minerals, vitamins you're deficient in. Two, because that can affect the brain as well, right? Most people are usually deficient in B12 and vitamin D. I'm not saying everybody, but a lot, the pattern is that. Now, there was this, I did a research report on the relationship between vitamin D and ADHD. And we're kind of getting in specifics now. Majors, focus on setting up the habits in order to get your food in. Just make sure you have it. You know what I mean? Healthier the better, more whole foods, all that good stuff. This is the minors now, the little details. And vitamin D ended up being that factor to where if you had vitamin D deficiency compared to the healthy and like the non-ADHD person, the person with ADHD was more likely to have a vitamin D deficiency. Pretty interesting. Now, in addition to that, those who took vitamin D supplementation ended up having better symptoms of ADHD, to where the symptoms got a little bit better. And when you pair that with magnesium, it was even better. So it was very interesting to see how that went. And this is whether you were taking your medications or not, to where the effects of the medications were better too when you had this stuff in some of the studies. Now, I can't list all of them. I can attach the paper that I wrote if you want afterwards, but it's just a document, so I can turn it into a PDF for everybody to access. But it was very interesting on the different factors on how that helped it. One of the other things that is beneficial for ADHD is omega-3s. So, omega-3s, if you don't know what they are, there's omega-3, 6, and 9. You can find omega-3s in plant-based foods, but they're more abundant in fatty fish. So chia seeds, flax seeds are typically the higher amount where you have the omega-3s. And then fatty fish like salmon, mackerel, even sardines, they have higher amounts of omega-3. And this basically helps the brain fire the neurotransmitters better. It has them do what it's got to do. So your brain ends up functioning better. It's pretty cool. If you don't know what a neurotransmitter is, think of that runner's high you get. Those endorphins that get released. Well, you also have dopamine, serotonin, neuroepinephrine, all that stuff, which is on the fritz with an ADHD brain. It doesn't cycle them out as well. To where, think of it as, oh, it's being produced, now it's getting turned over to be produced again. Well, in ADHD, that's not happening. And this is simplifying things very much so. So, don't take this as an actual model for everything, but this is just simplified. So when you're able to support your diet and your exercise to help get those transmitters back up to replace what was going, that's helpful. That's what the medication does. The stimulants typically are going to increase the amount of dopamine that ends up going to the brain, and it decreases the breakdown of it too, so it slows down. I'm in an experimentation phase right now. I recently started a non-stimulant medication just to see how it affects what I've been doing to now. Because I don't have anything against medication, I just want to see if it works, right? Personally, since I have the anxiety, I know I didn't want to do the stimulant stuff, just because when I take more caffeine-based stuff, it doesn't work as well. Although when I take caffeine with L-theanine, usually in the form of green tea, I'm fine. So it just depends on how it's done. So experimentation is key to any of this stuff. But omega-3 is one of those things that has quite a bit of literature around it. There's other studies that are coming out on different things, but right now, when it comes to dietary supplementation, those are the ones with the most literature around it. L-theanine and caffeine, omega-3, vitamin D, magnesium, although there needs to be more studies, it's fair enough to say that if you're deficient in something, you should have it. So that's why you get the blood work done and you can go to the doctor. If you don't have access to that, I would ask a healthcare provider if you can, because I wouldn't just start supplementing with stuff if you don't know if you're deficient in it.
Yeah, totally. And I think that coming back to what generally people are looking at is, like you said, the majority of people are insufficient or deficient in vitamin D and magnesium. So there's a good chance of that, but definitely better to get your blood work done first. And you might even find something else. You might even find that you're pleasantly surprised and you're actually fine with vitamin D. So there's actually no point in taking it, and you can invest your money in higher quality food, for example, or a different type of supplement that's going to give you far better benefits. But coming full circle regarding everything you said there is just giving yourself the best chance at not being with any other shortcomings. I think that's a big thing. Is a lot of people, when it comes to their mental health, a lot of people ask me many times, like, should I prioritize my mental or physical health first? I'm like, well, realistically, there's no black and white answer, but there's a very, very good chance that your mental health is significantly going to be much, much better, and things are going to be much, much brighter if your physical health is in a good place, if you're eating well, if you're exercising or moving at some stage during the day, if you're seeing enough daylight and sunlight, you're sleeping well as well, which is a question I want to ask you in just a moment. And then obviously the other aspect is looking after your brain as much as possible. That's another thing that I got from you just then as well. So anything you can do to support the function of the brain is only going to give you benefits. And this goes for everyday person, and also the person who is kind of fighting that battle already with the ADHD side of things as well. How much does sleep play a part? I can imagine that's a major, major factor.
Yeah, so it's a twofold thing, right? So people with ADHD, usually sleep is not the thing that's a strong point for them. Whether it's racing thoughts right before bed, maybe it's boring to just lie there and fall asleep. So they end up procrastinating it and end up just crashing, right? So, but if you're able to manage to get enough sleep, that ends up helping the symptoms a lot more. But unfortunately, it's one of those things to where most people with ADHD, they just can't tolerate going to sleep, and it ends up being like this thing that just gets pushed off, to where the nighttime hours are where most of the function is for some people with ADHD, because nobody else is up, there's not as many distractions, they're able to get some stuff done because inspiration struck, and now they're avoiding procrastinating going to bed because they know they have to go to bed, right? So making sure you have a routine of going to bed is helpful, to where this is the time I'm going, and then have a similar wake-up time. It's helpful. I understand that it's not always going to be the thing that's the easiest to adjust. When it comes to mental health, it does help to have enough sleep as well, right? Because now your brain's able to function better, you're able to focus more. A lack of sleep usually ends up affecting weight loss too. It ends up affecting testosterone. It ends up affecting the way things are just operating in the brain.
Yeah, it's the emotional regulation piece as well. If you said earlier, like you said earlier, with ADHD, it's that lack of emotional regulation. That's another big part of sleep, is that emotional processing. So if already you are got one hand behind your back from that perspective, then you're not sleeping on top of that. That's going to cause a cascade of challenges from an emotional regulation and processing standpoint, no?
Yeah, it is. And the unfortunate thing, too, with ADHD is sometimes one of the comorbidities is sleep pattern disruptions. So it's not helpful at all in that fact of just getting the emotional regulation stuff from there. Really retraining the brain to focus back on one thing is helpful. That's where breath work or meditation or mindfulness activities can help. The thing is, it is extremely boring, and basically people with ADHD are allergic to boredom, to put it mildly. It was funny, there was this book called ADHD 2.0, and he was basically saying something along those lines. Essentially, those with ADHD, it's very hard for them to do a mindfulness-based activity. But if you end up incorporating the movement with it, maybe like yoga or qigong or something of that nature, or you just start really small, that can help improve that aspect of it, and then now you're able to relay back to kind of like calming down things so you can go to bed better. So that's a tactic that can be helpful if you're able to start working on that. You mentioned earlier if you should start focusing on the physical stuff or the mental stuff. Well, you have the gut-brain axis, to where the things that affect the gut end up affecting the mind, and I'm sure there's a vice versa relationship there, right? To where it's okay. The Body Keeps Score is a great book on, going over trauma and how that affects the body and how the body ends up storing trauma. Well, if you're able to release certain things too, that might end up helping decrease tension and other things, right? So what I would say is, if you're somebody who doesn't know where to start on the mental health aspect, and you don't really like or want to talk to somebody about stuff at the moment because you're just not ready, what I would focus on is get that body moving, start working on the physical health, because then it ends up improving the mental health and everything kind of gets more efficient. And just finding something that works for you and develop systems around it, on the organization, on getting it throughout your day. These are the things that are going to help you function better, so they're high priority lists. Whether it's 5 minutes or an hour is another story. But one thing is better than nothing, right? So maybe you have your breakfast now. You have that thing. All breakfast is breaking your fast, the first meal of the day. So it doesn't have to be in the morning. It just make sure you have that meal when you start to feel hungry, or maybe program it to where it's going to be a few hours after you wake up, something of that nature. And then you start to get those cues going. But that's going to end up helping your sleep too, you know, getting exercise and nutrition. So all these things affect the other. I kind of created this thing called 6 Pillars of Vitality, to where it goes over each pillar and they help support your overall vitality, energy, health, focus, you know, however you want to determine what vitality is to you. I determine it as my energy levels, but energy levels is widely affected by whether you're able to focus or not and the energy you put into that. So sleep, very helpful, but physical activity, nutrition is helpful for sleep.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all tied in together. And the more that you can do of each of every one of those things, and I can imagine that maybe some come easier than others, you know, like back when you were doing your wrestling, that seemed to be something that you could center your attention on quite comfortably, and that seemed to be a bit of a precursor to the nutrition side of things as well. So I think it's just about finding that thing in your life as well, and then just staying with it ultimately and not overcomplicating it. Like you said, if it's once a week and you get out for that run with the run club, and the element of accountability and community helps you with that aspect, and that helps you keep going, and then that ultimately has a tie into your sleep and getting you out of the house and getting you having fresh air and vitamin D that's coming from the sun and the daylight and everything along those lines. I think it's just about not underestimating those things as well. But Peter, this has been an awesome conversation. I feel like we've really gone really in depth into this topic, and it's the first time I think that we discussed this on the show. So it's been great to get your insights on this. And I'm curious to ask you 2 final questions. The first is, what impact do you want to have on the world with the work that you do?
There was this book called Why by Simon Sinek, to where it's Find Your Why. And I read this around when I was 17. And I was like, well, what is my why? And I overall came to, I want to help others live healthier lives. So the big impact I want to make is to help others live healthier, feel better. You know, I don't care how long you live. It's the quality of the amount of time you're living, right? So if we can end up increasing our impact, increasing the feeling and experience we're having as we're living, that's the impact I want to make. I want to help others enhance their quality of life through their health, because that's the main thing. Whether it's helping with fitness-fueled focus, you know, or helping those with ADHD like me kind of be able to have some other lifestyle changes that end up maybe helping with the symptoms that they end up having on top of other things like pharmaceuticals and other stuff. Because pharmaceuticals alone don't help ADHD. They help ADHD quite a bit. But you have to learn how to organize around it. You have to learn how other lifestyle factors, because pills don't teach skills, but they also only do so much, right? So the biggest impact is I want to help others learn how to utilize what they have in order to feel better.
Amazing. I love it. And I feel that you're going to do a good job at that. And where is the best place for people to find you if they want to keep up with the work that you're doing?
So I'm on many social media channels, and the best place you can find all those is my website. It's vitalu.org/home. And then if you're looking to book me for public speaking events too, that'll be under /events. If you just type in vitalu.org, you'll get an error sign. But you can also find the stuff on my social media. Peter the Vitality Guy on Instagram, and then TikTok I have Peter the Vitality Guy, but there's some underscore in there somewhere. We're going to have the links attached. So YouTube, I do more long-form content, so it's anywhere between minute and a half to an hour stuff on there. So that has more in-detailed talking stuff, if you like how we went about the podcast, to where we go over different focus on using fitness to focus, or going about a lot of ADHD and mental health topics, just because it's there's not enough on the two connecting, and I really wanted to get that stuff out there.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll make sure that's all in the show notes below. But Peter, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for your time.